If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Lotierzo, former fighter, part-time writer, full-time observer, joined by my esteemed co-host, Mr. Jack Hirsch, former 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association of America. Jack, before I bring you on, let me just say this. You may have to talk me off the ledge. Do you know why? Because the Philadelphia, let me just see if, okay, that works better. The Philadelphia Phillies and the Philadelphia Eagles are having big years, and there's nothing worse than being in this town and having to hear about it.
Well, I mean, the Phillies play the Atlanta Braves. I don't think they're going to get by Atlanta. Eagles are having so the NFL is great. Who knows what's going to happen? My Jets won yesterday. They're 3-2, so I'm happy on that. But boxing-wise, Frank, I'd rather see next month, more than an NFL game even, I would have rather seen Spence Crawford. We're not going to spend time talking about those guys, but Frank, every week, it's less and less likely to happen.
Oh, it's not going to happen this year, Jack.
No,
it's not going to happen this year.
Frank, they're going to fight. Each is going to fight someone else before they fight one another, at the very least. Least.
And that's weak, Jack. That's weak. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Having a little trouble getting focused here today. I don't like that. I think they should fight each other. I think that if, as I said countless times, if Spence doesn't fight Crawford next, he has to fight Ennis. And if he doesn't fight Ennis, then he looks like a coward.
You heard it here first. Ignore the ESPN scoops, because they have no real scoops, ESPN, because I know what goes on the inside. The talk is, okay, from what I'm gathering, unless Crawford and Spence somehow come to the table and say, the heck with it, they're going to make it happen, which is still a possibility, even though it's going downhill every day. Spence fights Crawford, but Frank, no matter who I talk, Spence fights Keith Thurman. I'm sorry, Spence and Keith Thurman. But Frank, I don't have a clue, and no one can tell me otherwise, who Crawford would be fighting in the interim. Not even.
I've seen, Jack, it's going to be Virgil Ortiz. And if we can't get Crawford versus Spence, Ortiz is a nice fill-in, and it's not a fill-in because Ortiz is the real deal. He can fight. I don't think he takes Crawford, but I think he gives him one heck of a good fight, and it's a fight that I would gladly pay to see. Hello, Joe Bergman.
Hello,
here we go, the fly, Philly, fly. Let him have it. Joe, by the way, Jack told me the Phillies have no shot, and I don't have to worry about the Eagles. So Jack's my buddy right now.
I did pick the Phillies over the Cardinals, so I have a little bit credibility when it comes to the
Phillies.
Because Atlanta's just too good overall, and Wheeler and Nola, I know they're good 1-2 punch, but they're not going to beat Atlanta. But
Jack, let's talk about a fight that's probably going to happen, and it ties into where we want to go.
Let's look. Frank, I hate to cut in. Are we going to talk about what didn't happen last weekend, what we were supposed to be talking about tonight?
Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. Yes, it was postponed. I believe it was Thursday before the fight. Conor Benn failed a drug test. I'm not a doctor. I've talked to a few people that have been involved with lifting, and they know a little bit about performance-enhancing drugs. They said what he took is something that all guys use after they're coming off a cycle. So Conor Benn came back hot, dirty. We didn't get the fight. Neither one of us could be right or wrong on our pick. I think we might see it eventually, but not today.
Yeah, I was disappointed in Conor Benn's promoter, Eddie Hearn, who I was starting to take a liking to. someone I was starting to gain a great deal of respect for. He tried to circumvent the British Boxing Board of Control along with the other promoter, let's put it that way. But Eddie Hearn was the mouthpiece. And Eddie Hearn was saying, well, Conor Benn is he should have due process. There should be a hearing. There should be this. There should be that. But meanwhile, the fight's a couple of days away. What are they supposed to do? Let the fight go through? I mean, it's obvious Conor Benn was dirty. It's obvious. Now the question is anything going to be done about it? Or is there a double standard, Frank? Because Canelo Alvarez tested positive, right? What did he get? A 6-month suspension? He might not have fought in 6 months anyway. It's a farce. But how big is Conor Benn as far as them giving him a suspension? If it was a real small-time fighter, they might give him the 4-year suspension. But
I think it'll be a year probably. That's just enough to hurt him and to make a statement. But, Jack, I hate to say this. I think you agree. I don't think you're as strong on it as I am. But in combat sports, all I can say is this. More are using than are not using. And there are so many ways to beat these tests. I don't trust any of them. Sometimes I think they should just go ahead, let them do it. Who cares? But you can't have the free for all like that. So, but I'm just saying there's a lot more going on in MMA, in boxing, in track and field, in weightlifting, in the NFL. A lot of them are using, and it's the world we live in, and it's something we have to deal with. And how you doing there, Jason? Good evening to you.
Hey, Jason. Okay, so what about this upcoming weekend, Frank? I mean, I know I'm going to be in the Barclays Center to see Deontay Wilder's comeback fight. When was the last time he won a fight? He's had the 3 fights with Fury. So it's been
Jack, it's amazing. It's ironic that yesterday was 1 year ago to the day that he fought Tyson Fury in their 3rd fight. He took a hellacious beating, even though he almost gave as much as he took. I mean, he had Fury hurt. He hit him with a right hand in the 4th round. He rattled his body. But Deontay Wilder took a lot of punishment in that fight. And I am anxious to see what he has left. I think he's fighting the ideal guy. And when I say that, I mean a guy who stylistically matches up with him. A guy who's not a great boxer. He's just big. Deontay can handle that. He's quicker. And there's a guy that in Helenius who's not afraid to mix it up, who has been stopped, who's there to get hit. But on the other side, you have Wilder, who may be vulnerable. So even though Wilder's a big favorite, Jack, and obviously I have to pick him to win, I think Helenius could be in the fight. And I wouldn't think it's a monumental upset if Helenius did beat him. The fact that Wilder may not be the guy he was before the last fight.
Good or bad, Frank? Answer me one more as far as Wilder goes. If the fight goes the full distance, Wilder wins widely on points by a big, big margin. Good or bad for Wilder, the result?
I think people will look at him, Jack, as he's not quite Superman. I don't know how much that helps him. And I think they'll reevaluate him and they'll think that maybe he's not what he was. I know where you're going. And for Wilder to capture the public's imagination again, he probably needs a stunning knockout. But in his case, Jack, and in this opponent, he is fighting a guy who, again, has been stopped twice, who is there to get hit, and I can see him winning and looking impressive, even if he loses the first couple rounds of the fight.
And if he wins, looks impressive, even if he doesn't look impressive, as long as he wins, the plan is to match him with Andy Ruiz in his next fight, and then the winner of that fight would be in line for something perhaps a little bigger, because both of them, Andy Ruiz and Deontay Wilder, are under contract to the PBC.
Right. It's an easy fight to make.
They don't have to deal with the other promoters. And it comes out, it's a good fight. It's a good matchup.
Jack, I think if Wilder looks good and he wins by stoppage in, say, 7 or 8 rounds, and it's a convincing win, I think he solidifies himself as the third best heavyweight in the world, behind Fury and behind Usyk. Would you think that's fair?
No. Anthony Joshua to me is more well-rounded than Deontay Wilder.
No, I mean where you would peg them on if they fought.
Who I paid
Deontay Wilder would only be an underdog to Usyk and Fury.
I'm not sure if he fought AJ in the UK. I think AJ would be favored in the UK. If they fought in Vegas, I think AJ would be slightly favored, believe it or not.
Well, I disagree with you there, Jack.
I'm wrong. We're just talking about setting the odds. And
that all depends. Let's look at it this way. Let's say, since this is Monday before the fight, we don't know the result. Let's just say that Wilder wins inside of 10 rounds, doesn't look great, but wins in an electrifying fashion. I think that the only two guys he would be an underdog against would be Fury and Usyk. I think he would be favored over Joshua if Joshua doesn't fight between now and when they fought.
I'm not arguing that point. I'm not sure who I would pick to win the fight. But AJ, Anthony Joshua is a very high quality still. Losing to Usyk is no disgrace. It was a very competitive fight. He had Usyk in bad trouble in the 9th round, and Usyk sucked it up like a champion, came on in the championship rounds, and won the fight. It's not like Anthony Joshua was outclassed. I mean, he gave a very good account of himself against Usyk, but just happened to come up short. Frank, a couple of other fights this weekend. First, a women's fight that's very intriguing. Claressa Shields against Savannah Marshall. In the UK, there's a lot of bad blood. How can you not have bad blood in a Claressa Shields fight? If you sneeze, she'll get offended and think, you're sneezing at her.
Jack, I don't follow much women's boxing. I'm not a fan of Claressa Shields. And all I can say is this. She'll probably win because I want her to lose. That's my deep analysis on that because I haven't watched her that much. I don't care for her. I know she's tough. She's not a puncher. She's a good boxer. I know she's in condition, but I'm not. She just has not captured my imagination.
Savannah Marshall is the punch in the fight, but something about women's boxing, you don't get the same knockouts you do like with the men. You don't get the knockdowns like
you don't have the rounds, and the rounds are 2 minutes.
Right. But I like Claressa Shields in that fight. And then there's the rematch in Australia. What a day Saturday is. Devin Haney and George Kambosos. You've already went on record as saying this fight, Frank, doesn't excite you at all. You see Haney basically shutting him down.
Jack, I want to see the fight because I like watching Haney. He's skilled. I do like watching Haney. He's a nice boxer. He can pretty much do anything. He's not much of a puncher, but he's pretty versatile. I just think that this is a style matchup that favors Haney. And a friend of ours the other day, I don't know if you saw this, but he made a post about rematches that were completely different. Ben Dowdy. I don't think that this fight can be that. Now, some of the fights that they talked about, Lennox Lewis and Hasim Rahman, basically the same fight, but Lewis was in shape. But a fight where we had one result in one style fight, and then the loser completely changed and won the fight was the first two fights between Holyfield and Bowe. Holyfield attacked Bowe the first time, got beat up in the process, paid for it. Going into the rematch, he realized, okay, the guy's a little too big and strong. I can't go to him. I have to bounce around, use the ring, and box him. Okay, he wins. See, why I don't think that applies this fight is because I don't think George Kambosos can fight any other way except being the aggressor. And Haney's the boxer. So what can Kambosos do this time, Jack, that he didn't do last time? I have a saying in these type of fights. He can bring more of what didn't work the last time. So I don't see him having a foil for Haney. That's why I think Haney wins in almost a repeat.
Okay, what can he bring to the table that's different? Sometimes they're intangibles. For example, take another lightweight contest. Esteban de Jesus handed Roberto Duran his first defeat in a lightweight contest 5 months after Duran won the title from Ben Buchanan. But then again, Duran stopped de Jesus the next 2 times. It was only a question of getting into better condition and fighting with more intensity.
Right. Their first fight was an overweight fight, Jack, and I don't think and Duran, I think he was still celebrating beating Buchanan. I don't think his head was in the fight.
Agreed completely.
And even in the rematch, he got dropped in the first round.
Ortiz and Ismael Laguna. Laguna wins the title off Ortiz in the first fight by decision. Ortiz beats him decisively by decision.
In the rematch.
Ortiz claimed he was sick. But if I'm Haney, what optimism can I take? I can look at it this way, Frank. You say I got beaten bad if I'm Kambosos, but I lost by only 116, 112 on 2 of the cards, meaning if I could do 2 rounds better on the cards, I'm not going to lose. 2 rounds.
Well, Jack, the judges do play a big role, but I didn't see the fight that closely. I don't think it was a 7-5 fight. I thought it was more like 9-3. So I think Kambosos has a very high hill to climb. I think he needs Haney not to be on his game, or he needs to get lucky. And I don't think either of those two will be the case on Saturday night. I think it goes the distance. I think Haney outboxes him, and it's another decision win.
I agree with you 100%, Frank. But to look to make a case for Kambosos, I wouldn't rule him out completely, because the fight's in Australia, and if Haney wins legitimately 7-5, Kambosos could get the decision under that circumstance in Australia. Maybe a neutral judge is influenced by the cheering, intimidated by his surroundings. There's so many different variables, I don't have to tell you, that if Kambosos could keep him reasonably close, who knows what could happen. Jason, the fight's on ESPN. It's from Australia. It might come on even Eastern time, like 12:30 in the morning.
You know, Jack, that's something we better check, because there are a lot of big college football games Saturday, and we know that ESPN up until fight time is probably going to be college football throughout most of the day. Now, I don't know how they schedule the time. I should have checked that before we went on the air, but that's something you're going to have to pay attention to, Jason, because of the time difference. And remember, ESPN is college football all day on Saturday unless there's a fight. And Lee Groves, Jack, Lee Groves wanted to know what we thought of Joe Joyce in the heavyweight picture. And you know something, Lee? We forgot to touch on him. You could make a case that he might have a claim for that 3rd spot, and he may only be an underdog to Usyk and Fury. And as far as Joe Joyce and Deontay Wilder, Lee, I want to see what Wilder looks like this weekend. But I could make a case that Joe Joyce just might be the type guy to beat him, because he has the chin, the strength, and he also has this style of bringing it forward, that he would crowd some of Wilder's power and that right hand, but he's there to get hit. But it's a fight. Now, there's a fight.
Joe Joyce is the most hittable world-class in boxing. He has a miserable defense, but Frank, his pressure is relentless.
Yes.
Relentless. He comes at you the way Tex Cobb did.
Or George Foreman, the second George Foreman.
Well, even more so. He comes at you with more intensity. Okay? I mean...
and Jack, that breaks guys down mentally, too.
Mentally down, exactly. See,
he beats you down mentally and physically, and most people overlook that, but that is a big thing to try to overcome, because if you have a guy coming at you and you're hitting him almost at will with almost anything you want, and he's not being deterred, it messes with your mind. You think, what do I have to do to stop him?
Well, I call it pressure cookers. Frank, right before we went on, I think, unless you mentioned it early in the show, Tyson Fury, it looks like he's detouring to Derek Chisora. Didn't he fight Chisora a couple of times before, early in his career?
They fought 3 times, Jack. They fought in 2014 and 2011, and
Right.
Fury won both.
Right,
a stoppage and a decision.
Right. And neither fight was that close as I recall. And Derek Chisora, it's good for him if he could get a nice payday out of it. Good for him. He certainly deserves it. Derek Chisora shouldn't be fighting. For the amount of punishment he's taken in the ring, he goes on and on and on. But I give him virtually no chance against Tyson Fury. I mean, he's not a big puncher, Chisora. He's not going to be able to put enough pressure on him. He just doesn't have the tools, I think, to even treble Tyson Fury. I see it as a one-sided match, kind of like Fury and Dillian White.
Jack, I think it'll look a lot like that, but Chisora doesn't hit as hard as White. And Fury is one of those guys. Now, I know a lot of the old school, I want to say, guys that we talk to, they don't like to give the new guys credit, and they're a little slow with Fury. But Jack, Fury is a massive problem to match up against because he's big, long, strong. He can box. He can move. He showed he can take a punch and recuperate. What is the style to beat him? And if you're a guy like Chisora that basically is the same guy every round, you're going to walk in, you're going to take punches, how are you going to beat him? You don't hit hard enough to knock him out or to get him to change anything he doesn't want to do. And he can outwork you and turn you and box you the whole night. So Fury is a tough matchup for Chisora. I see no way Chisora wins this fight, but as you said, I'm glad he's going to get the payday. He deserves it.
Yeah, definitely. I think I cut you off early in the show, Frank, getting off the heavyweights.
I was going to come back. You did, but that's good.
But okay, go ahead.
Well, Jack, one thing I wanted to touch on, and it seems we do this all the time. Jack, the Wilder-Helenius fight, I just checked on my cable before we went on the air. It's $74.99. Now, you're going to the fight. That's great. I'm not. But I really want to see it. I don't want to pay. Jack, I just think that's too much. Why couldn't they make it $49.99? I said after the last fight with Fury, I will pay to see Wilder again. He earned my respect. All his flaws that he has, the guy comes to fight, he's in shape, and he's exciting. But, Jack, $75?
Frank, they would pull my press credential if I, suggested you don't pay that for the fight. I said it's not worth it. So I'm not going to say that, at all. It's entertainment at the end of the day. People go out, people order dinner, they do this, they do that. I'm never against someone getting a pay-per-view show. If you're getting it for entertainment purposes, you're in a Saturday night, you want to relax, you want to get in your pajamas, lie down, chug a beer or whatever, and enjoy and have a night of boxing. I'm good with you getting it based on that. But certain pay-per-view shows, if you're getting it based on the value, you hear these promoters say, we have a stacked card. It's stacked with garbage, Frank. It's like the newspapers being ready to be thrown out. You have them tied up, it's stacked. Okay?
But, Jack, here's the problem. I agree with what you just said, but here's the problem about the entertainment part. It's a Saturday night. I can go out to dinner for entertainment. There are a ton of great college games on. There are baseball playoff games that are going to be on. There's a lot going on that I don't have to pay to see. Now I'm going to have to pay that much money to see a fight where I'm pretty much sure how the outcome's going to go, and I'm going to have to wait 11 till 11:30, quarter to 12 for it to start. I've already been entertained that late at night. In fact, this past weekend, I missed the Fondura Ocampo fight. I had to see highlights of it, Jack, because I fell asleep watching the undercard on Showtime and then on TV watching the Alabama-Texas A&M game, and I fell asleep and missed the whole card.
Yeah, listen, I agree, but you do have Haney Cambosis on ESPN. It's not pay-per-view.
Right.
So there are alternatives, but Haney Kambosos is probably going to begin after the Wilder fight ends. It's coming from Australia. The Dawn fight might not come on, like I said, till 12:30 in the morning Eastern time. So
Lee, I get what you're saying. You're right. They have to charge that much money to pay the fighters. But does Deontay Wilder have to make $15 million?
They can pay them less, the fighters. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but as long as people are going to pay the money, they're going to charge that amount. I mean, it's a free enterprise system. I usually don't get pay-per-view shows. If you give me a good show, and to me, a good show are 3 good, solid fights. I
agree.
I don't need a spectacular main event. I need 3 good, solid fights. I mean, that's all I need. And
Jack, what are the odds? What are the odds I get it? What would you set those odds at?
That you
Because right now I don't plan on buying the fight.
2-1 that you get it.
2-1, I get it. Okay.
You get it, I would bet. Yeah, because
I would probably take that bet right now, but if it's 11:30 and I have guys texting me, asking me what happened.
Have you? But this is something I would never do. But you're like me in the sense you like to watch the whole show. But you, Frank, have been known to miss a part of the undercard and then cave into the temptation.
I cave at the last minute, yes.
But you missed the darn undercard.
I did that with Ortiz and Ruiz.
You know what you're like? You're like the guy who goes to meetings at Alcoholics Anonymous.
Right.
Goes, meets his friend at the bar and has no plans to drink. You hang there 3 hours. The last half hour, you start drinking after holding out the first 2.5.
That's a pretty good description of me, Jack.
Yeah.
And again, I missed the Fondura Campo fight. From what I saw, the highlights, Fondura is a problem, but he gets hit too much. He will not beat Jermell Charlo. He might give him a good fight for a little while. He's just not at that level.
Frank, you're jumping to conclusions here. I mean, I don't disagree with you. Let me make that clear. Jermell Charlo is not a lock to beat Tim Tszyu. They're supposed to be fighting in the later part of January, I believe.
Jermell Charlo is going to beat the crap out of Tim Tszyu.
I'm not saying he's not going to beat him. Okay, so don't take that as a prediction. Don't come back to me and say,
well, it sounds like you're making his case.
No, he's not a lock to beat Tim Tszyu. Tim Tszyu is big, strong, and powerful. If Jermell Charlo doesn't hurt him, he's going to be having his moments where he's going to have Jermell Charlo on the ropes and landing heavy blows and going to work. It's a risky fight for Charlo. There's a good chance Charlo will beat him because Charlo is a wonderful fighter. Call him an outstanding fighter because he's
cleaned out the division, Jack. He's left no doubt he's the best guy in the division. Yeah. Well, Tim Tszyu's a one-way guy who will be right there. I agree. He's strong. He's powerful. But Charlo just does everything better. He has a mean streak in him. He has a chin, and he can fight. I don't see, of course it's a fight. Anything can happen. I don't see a case for Tim Tszyu.
I do see a case for Tim Tszyu, absolutely. This doesn't mean I'm going to be picking him. I'll reserve judgment on the pick. And it shouldn't sound like I'm leaning towards Tim Tszyu because I'm not. I'm just saying Tim Tszyu is a serious threat. I'll tell you my pick right now. I'm picking Charlo. I mean, I knew that before the show. I'm picking.
So you want to tweak me, in other words, right?
I recognize someone as being a threat. Like if Jim Joyce fought Tyson Fury, odds are you would pick Fury to win, but you'd say don't discount Joe Joyce. He's a genuine.
I agree. Threat. I don't think this is as close as that, but I know the point you're making.
That's my logic. I don't look at Sebastian Fondura as a serious threat to beat Jermell Charlo. He's a very good fighter, Fondura. Very good. But their levels, if these were students in school, Charlo would be an A+ student. Fondura would be a B+, A- student. And you put them in an academic competition, the A+ student's probably going to come out ahead. And Fondura's exceeded expectations to me. I bought into the stereotype in the beginning. 6'6", junior middleweight.
Jack, that is a problem to deal with, and Charlo hasn't seen that much, but Charlo's just he's outstanding. He really is. He's almost special.
Listen. Okay, so Lee agrees with me basically. He favors Charlo the way I do, but what worries me is that Charlo is a low output, high accuracy fighter. Right? He can be out hustled, and if there's a big difference in output, Zoo can steal rounds. Yeah, and is this fight taking place in Australia?
Jack, you could say that about what Lee just said. You could say about Terrence Crawford too, but he doesn't need to be a bell-to-bell attacker because he's so explosive. That would be my retort to that.
No, shame on me for even mentioning Crawford in the beginning with him and Spence. These guys aren't going to fight one another next, so let's forget about the two of them.
Jack, it's such a sad commentary. Now Spence coming out and saying, "Oh, news to come. You all better listen. It's not over. It's going to happen." We'll believe it when we see it. But Jack, we have a couple of things to take care of. All right, let's go on the record with our picks. Wilder versus Salinas. I like Wilder inside. I'm going to say Wilder stops him in probably between 7 and 11 rounds. I don't think it'll go the distance. I like Wilder to stop him.
This is a cop out. I like Wilder by a wide decision.
Decision, okay.
Not close at all. I mean, I just, don't get a good feel about a fighter like Wilder who's coming off a devastating loss. And I know he gave a good account of himself. He showed the heart of a lion.
But he might have left in the ring that night. We don't know.
In the layoff after that, and he was up sky high emotionally for Fury. He's not going to be up that high.
But Jack, that layoff might have done him good. He rested, got himself together. He says he wants to come in lighter. I actually like him better when he's lighter. Okay, so we both like Wilder. How about Haney?
Lopsided decision. Yeah, Haney clearly on points. A repeated first fight.
Okay, we agree on that.
Yeah.
Now, we have some fantastic fights that were submitted. But before I go to that, I just want to run something by you. I said earlier I was watching the Fondura undercard that was on Showtime Sports Channel from 7:30 to 9:30. There were 3 fights. They were good fights. I'm watching that.
Fondura, his younger sister.
She opened the card, Jack. She won a decision. Anyhow, one of the commentators, his name is Luke Thomas. Do you know him?
No.
Okay. He was with Brian Campbell of CBS.
Yeah.
And Brian. Jack, I forget what fight it was. It might have been the Mean Machine fight, which was the last fight of the undercard before they went to Showtime. And he got his opponent, Fox, in trouble. And this man, Luke Thomas, said he can't survive trouble with trunk movement. Do you know what trunk movement is?
I don't have a clue. Trunk movement. Well, I guess, wait. He shakes his butt at him or something, like on the ropes. You know the way Ali used to do when he covered up?
I never thought of that, but that maybe Ali invented trunk movement too. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. No clue.
Okay, so
terms. I mean,
I had a little fun with that. I sent Russell a text on Sunday morning because I just wanted to make sure. And he said it was invented by, I think, Egyptian elephants. It's the way they move. But Jack, what is it with these guys? Why do they have to try to reinvent the language? Boxing, you either know it or you don't. You don't have to come off as an intellectual to show people that you know what you're talking about. Just like they talk about changing levels. No, you don't change levels. You go up or you go down. Up is to the head, down is to the body. But, he changed levels. Oh, he's on an elevator? I just want to get that off my chest. I am so tired of that.
Well, Frank, they use the term that you had, like the check left hook. Why couldn't they just use the term a counter left hook? Okay, so they have to use a check left hook. In the 84 United States Olympic trials, Howard Cosell did the broadcasting, which is ironic because he had retired from boxing after Larry Holmes beat
2 years before that.
Ex-cop, but he came back for the Olympics because he said, "Oh, amateur boxing's so nice and pure." Show what a hypocrite Cosell was, a complete hypocrite. But I remember he kept referring to the jab as the speed jab. The speed jab. What the heck's a speed jab? It's a jab.
They all should be fast.
Every jab is fast. There's no. I mean, that's the.
I mean,
jab.
I will say this though, Jack. And I've heard Paulie Malignaggi say it, and he is right. There are throwaway jabs that you throw without the intent to land.
Of course. But the point about it, like, I understand sometimes you just pour out the jab, but if you're trying to land the jab and be effective, you don't call it a speed jab. I mean, that's what they were fighting 3-round fights. Every jab.
Everything was fast in 3-round fights back then in the amateurs. Right. All right, Jack. So I think we've pretty much covered everything. We both like Wilder. We both like Haney.
Fights. I am waging a protest. You stated one mythical fight last week. It was completely unfair to me to have to comment on the fight because there was a discrepancy in weight classes and tangibles. It just was out of whack.
What fight was that?
Roberto Duran, Mickey Walker. Okay? If you're comparing Roberto Duran to anyone, talk about him as a lightweight and maybe a welterweight, but he only had really 2 fights as a welterweight where he looked great against Carlos Palomino, and more than 2 fights, the 2 winning fights. In the first fight with Sugar Ray Leonard, and then of course he lost the rematch. But the 2 fights in which he was in form at his peak. To talk about him fighting Walker at middleweight, Duran once.
No, Jack, that was welterweight.
At welterweight, yeah, but he didn't have enough of his whole body of work was basically 2 fights at welterweight, and it's not enough of a body of work. He wasn't
okay. He did fight. He fought Leonard twice at welterweight. He fought Palomino at welterweight, and he had 7 fights before Leonard where he was over 145. But he was just trying to get his way. But Jack, it's hypothetical. It's hypothetical. That's all. Okay. It was hypothetical. I took Walker in that fight because I think that Walker matched up with Duran if they met at their best as welterweights. I don't think that was so bad. Jack, we have a ruling. We shoot your case down.
Ruling.
You got to make a pick. You had to make a pick.
Okay. Well, what do we have?
All right, but this one, here's one that we received, and I like this one. We'll take turns. You go first. At middleweight, Bernard Hopkins against Thomas Hearns.
At middleweight. I'm going to go with Bernard Hopkins there. I think he'd be able to smother Tommy Hearns' big bombs. He was so wily, Hopkins, such a hard guy to knock out. Listen, early in Hopkins' middleweight reign, okay, when he was middleweight, Segundo Mercado knocked him down a couple of times.
Twice.
It was right, and it was a draw. But if you judge, and it was fought in Ecuador. If you looked at the record book, you would assume Hopkins was robbed because it was in Ecuador. You'd assume, but he really wasn't robbed. I thought he won the fight barely, but he wasn't robbed. So I've seen Hopkins flat at certain times in certain fights, not really at his best. But I like to think of Hearns as a welterweight when he was a real destroyer. And I have to feel that Hopkins would basically roll with Hearns' best punches for the most part, not get caught, have a way to come on late in the fight, win, the closing rounds and edge Hearns out and win a close decision.
Okay, I agree, Jack. I think Hopkins thinks the place out. He slows the fight down. He ties Hearns up. He has enough of a chin. He has the stamina. He doesn't hit hard enough to get Hearns out of there. It would be nothing like the Hagler fight. I think Hopkins would win. If it's 12 rounds, I guess it's a 7-5 decision, but I could see it being very controversial. But I think Hopkins would do just enough and prevent Hearns from having those big flashy moments where I think Hopkins would win a decision, and it might not even be. I don't think it would be a good fight or one that we would clamor to see again. But I just think Hopkins has a way. I think somehow, some way, he'd find a way to bring Hearns down to his level and take away the electrifying punches of Hearns. So Hopkins wins. Okay. Here's one. Jack Johnson, 1910, versus Smokin' Joe Frazier of 1971. I'll make it quick. I'll go first. No contest. I've watched. Now, it's not fair with Jack Johnson, Jack, because there are only 7 or 8 films of his fights. But from what I've seen, he has not the style nor the power to keep Frazier off. Frazier would cut the ring off, get inside, work his body, force him to fight 3 minutes a round. And I just don't see any way Jack Johnson, who fought most guys like Marvin Camel and Tommy Burns and Hart, who came, or Marvin Hart, who came straight in, no head movement, not big power. Frazier would force him to punch down. If he tried to tie him up, Joe would break him up to the body. I think Frazier stops Johnson, whether it's 12 or 15 rounds.
Now, Frazier said after his rematch with Jerry Quarry, when he beat him, he said when he analyzed the fight, he didn't see what Quarry could do different. He said, where was Jerry going to go? And then he threw out like a jab, Frazier, to just kind of demonstrate. In other words, he was saying a guy has to have a really good jab, something to keep me off him. He could move and jab. Johnson didn't seem to have much of a jab from the take.
No, Jack, he held. He tied you up. He tried to glove block. That doesn't work with Frazier. Plus, he's being forced back the whole time.
Right. It might go the distance. Johnson would be holding a lot. Frazier would be outworking him. I could see a sloppy fight taking place in that sense where Johnson is constantly on the defense.
Yeah, wrestling the whole time.
Yeah, maybe it would be something like a fight Frazier had early in his career. It didn't quite go the distance, but it ended in the 10th and final round against a cagey fight like Eddie Machen. It might be like a Liston Eddie Machen fight at the end of the day where Johnson is wily enough, smart enough to
Or Frazier Mathis.
Or Frazier.
It took Frazier a little while to get to him.
Right. I mean, I could see it going the distance and Frazier completely outworking him like 9 rounds to 3 or something like that.
Lee, you're right about that, but he would not nullify or frustrate Frazier because the only way you can frustrate Frazier is if you knock him on his rear end, and only George Foreman could do that. If Johnson could track down Ali in all 3 fights, and in 41 rounds, Muhammad Ali only boxed about 9 of them on his toes, Frazier would get to Jack Johnson.
Well, you gotta understand when we make predictions like this, we have to kind of prorate how much bigger they would be if they were fighting late on. Frazier would be fighting today. If he were around today, Frazier would be bigger than he was, and Johnson would be bigger than he was. We have to kind of condense that because Johnson, in reality, I mean, he was called a Galveston Giant, but what was
he was a big heavyweight, Jack Rosera.
Yeah, but he was only, I think, a little over 6 feet. I remember when they had that imaginary tournament, the computer tournament in the 1960s, okay? Johnson was matched with Max Baer, and everyone was picking Johnson, and Nat Fleischer went on record calling Johnson the greatest heavyweight of all time. I remember Angelo Dundee was asked his prediction on the fight, and at that time, Dundee was picking, it seemed, every fight correctly. It was incredible. And he described Johnson's height, and he said, Max Baer would be able to reach a guy like Johnson. And he actually picked Max Baer to beat Johnson. And then in the computer tournament, which is all make-believe, Baer actually did beat Johnson. But right, I mean, is Johnson really going to outwork Frazier? He could maybe nullify him, but not to the point of winning rounds.
Yeah, exactly. I think maybe he could slow Frazier down from beating him up, but he could not beat Frazier up. Not the way Frazier puts that pressure on you.
Agreed.
He makes you fight 3 minutes around. He's very hard to tie up, very good inside. Johnson doesn't have the punch to get to him. Jack, there's a lot of old timers that would disagree with us and old school guys. I think they would favor Johnson, but I don't see Johnson beating Frazier 1 out of 5 times.
Better fight not to talk about tonight for another time, but not for tonight to talk.
You're going to say Dempsey.
But no. Well, that would be interesting. That would be a great one to talk about. Johnson and Jim Jeffries, and Jeffries was in his prime. He fought a guy coming off a 6-year layoff. Give me a break.
Who had to drop 100 pounds.
And Johnson's been given all this credit, and Jim Jeffries' legacy goes down the drain. I mean, unbelievable.
That would have been a good one, Jack. I actually think stylistically Johnson matches up with Jeffries pretty good, but I would have liked to have seen that.
Well, we'll save that for another time, perhaps.
All right, Jack. Let's see. All right, here's a good one. James Toney versus Joe Calzaghe at 168. You go first.
Toney at his best is a great fighter. Man, oh man. He, at his very best, he can hang with anyone. I mean, he's remarkable, but I've seen too much of James Toney to know how inconsistent he is. He's just so inconsistent. You know, with all his great shoulder rolls, being a defensive master, countering, Calzaghe has one thing Toney doesn't have, a work rate.
Exactly.
Calzaghe is a non-stop machine, a non-stop work rate. He's going to be working every second of every round. And Toney might be absolutely magnificent, but it's going to be picking his spots. On work rate alone, I think Calzaghe edges him out, but I do think it winds up being a close decision.
So you like Calzaghe?
I do.
Jack, this is no fun because I agree. I think Calzaghe would do what Dave Tiberi did, only threefold. Calzaghe does come in with a lot of movement. He's kind of a helter-skelter guy, but his work rate is incredible. He's durable. He doesn't get tired, and he has a good chin. Toney is not a big puncher. And you know what else, Jack, people forget? We think of Toney and how skilled he was, but you know what? James Toney had some stinkers at 160 and 168. Yeah. People forget that. For some reason in those weight classes, Toney wasn't very consistent. And he's not going to knock Calzaghe out. And it's going to be hard to outbox him because Calzaghe's going to force him to fight. He's never going to hurt Toney, but he's just going to be on him and touching him and making him work at every spot of the fight. I think Calzaghe out-hustles Toney and wins probably a split decision. But I would favor Calzaghe in that one because of style. As Lee said, southpaw, that might play a factor. I don't think that bothers Toney as much as other guys. But I could see it throwing him off for a little bit. But Calzaghe, tough, durable, strong. Jack doesn't get his due as an outstanding great fighter that he should get. But retired 46-0. I don't think he does. Do you?
No. I think it's fair. I'm going to be honest about it. And I lump both Andre Ward and Joe Calzaghe on this. Their career was slightly incomplete. It sounds harsh what I'm saying, but it's true. I don't blame them for retiring when they did. It's always better to retire ahead of the game before the game gets to you. Okay?
Right.
They didn't push it out to the limit where you could call either guy, Calzaghe or Ward, a true all-time great. Now, you could say that about them within their division, perhaps, but not, but you don't have a history.
But what would you have wanted Calzaghe to do, Jack?
Had he continued fighting a little longer, gotten some more title defenses, got more of a high-profile fight. Look, at the end of his career, his last fight, I was there to guard when he beat Roy Jones. He got knocked down by a faded Roy Jones. And
Hopkins dropped him too.
Roy Jones was knocking no one down. Hopkins knocked him down. Calzaghe edged Hopkins out on his work, right? That was still a good Bernard Hopkins in the older version. But something about Calzaghe, he didn't quite squeeze it out to the end, but kudos to him for not doing it. He retired at the right time because it had gotten to the point where he was maybe risking a loss. Maybe his skills, he sensed, were starting to diminish a little bit. Training became harder. I mean, great fighter. But when we talk about, if I mention the name Roy Jones, you're going to say all-time great. Sugar Ray Leonard, you're going to tell me all-time great. If I say Andre Ward and Joe Calzaghe, you're going to put them a couple of steps behind those guys, I'm sure.
The one thing that keeps them in the running, Jack, is their undefeated record. And
Exactly.
It wasn't like they dodged guys. They did fight everybody who was out there.
No, but if I compare, listen, if I tried to draw a comparison to the guy you consider the best ever, Sugar Ray Robinson, and I said, I put Leonard and Duran on Robinson's level, you'll probably say, no, I disagree, Jack, but I can see where you're coming from. You wouldn't be outraged. You could maybe live with that, even though you disagree. But if I said I'm putting Andre Ward and Joe Calzaghe and Sugar Ray Robinson's level, you go, no, Jack, don't go there with that. It would be
okay, Jack, but the opposite, what the counter to that is? Who are you going to put on Robinson's level? There's maybe two guys in history. That's not really a fair comparison if Ray Robinson is the measuring stick. Now, I agree. I would have liked to have seen Andre Ward hang around a little bit longer and fight some of these upcoming light heavyweights. But Jack, maybe he didn't want to risk the loss. I could see that. Has enough money, has his health and whatnot. I can't kill him for that, but I could.
I'm not condemning him for that. But there's a small price to pay professionally because you come a little short of all-time great status. When I talk about Hagler, Duran, Leonard, you think in terms of all-time greats. I talk about Calzaghe, Andre Ward, you think of the term great, but you don't think all-time great. That's what I'm trying to say.
I think, Jack, I think of Ward very borderline all-time great. I think his skills were that good, and he was another one of those water fighters that he always found a solution for the guy he fought and the style that he was presented with. Calzaghe was pretty much the same thing every time out. But Andre Ward, I think, had some Mayweather in him where he was very adaptable, stronger than he looked, bent the rules a little bit, but was all about winning, always in shape, and a very tough guy mentally. I think I could see a case that Andre Ward, if we're going to rank him as a super middleweight, I could see him going down as one of the greats.
Well, within that division, because he fought predominantly as a super middleweight.
Right. So, and he cleaned it out.
Yeah, within that division, but I'm talking about in general, just not even regarding weight divisions per se. Who's an all-time
But Jack, if you're an all-time great in one division, doesn't that make you great?
All-time greats, there are not a lot of them. You mentioned earlier Mickey Walker, Harry Greb. You talk about guys, Sam Langford, Joe Louis, Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Robinson, Henry Armstrong, Roberto Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard. I mean, that's what I mean. I'm talking about that type of club.
Yes, there's legendary all-time greats. I think Ward is a great.
Okay, you could call them. They're not on if all-time greats are a team, Calzaghe and Ward are on the second team. They're the backups coming off the bench. The guys I mentioned a little while ago, those are your starters.
But you did pick the best of the best. If you had to say one of the 100 greatest fighters of all time, I think Andre Ward makes the list.
Top 100, I can't argue against that. I mean, I'm not sitting down doing it, but 100, yeah. I mean, I can't. Wouldn't you rate Pernell Whitaker ahead of Andre Ward and Joe Calzaghe? There's another name. I mean, and wouldn't you rate Evander Holyfield maybe ahead of those two as well? Even though
You're right, Jack. But Evander Holyfield is the greatest cruiserweight of all time, and I think he's a top 10 all-time heavyweight. That's a hell of a resume for Andre Ward to try to beat.
Wait, the victory over Kovalev in the first fight wasn't that impressive. It was impressive the way it came on, but I thought Kovalev won the fight.
I thought Kovalev won the fight by 1 point.
Yeah, so did I. But the way Ward came on and made it close, in the later
and he undressed Kovalev in the rematch.
Yeah. Ward was
now the Chad Dawson fight. I'm not that crazy about because I don't like that Dawson came down to 168. I thought he lost something there. I'm not saying Dawson would have beat him, but I just think he was compromised.
Dawson was never the same after that.
No.
Wow. He was outstanding for a while, Chad Dawson.
All right, Jack. So we have Hopkins over Hearns. We have Frazier over Johnson. Calzaghe over Tony. There's a real good one here, but there's not a lot of film of the guy. But my friend Dan Workman gave it to me, so he sent it to us. So let's just go with this. The great Argentine middleweight Eduardo Lausi against Ruben Hurricane Carter.
I'm not qualifying Lausi. He spent his whole career virtually in Argentina. I know he came to New York for a couple of fights or so. I think he fought in Providence too, but there's not.
I think didn't he fight Fulmer in New York?
Yeah, and
he dropped Fulmer.
Yeah, he's had a ton of fights. So when I say not enough knowledge for my part.
Okay? Well, we didn't see him. We've read about him, but we didn't see. I've only seen clips of his fights.
Exactly. I don't have a good feel on him. I would have had to see him fight a number of times, and and in those fights he had in Argentina, I think he had over 90% of his fights in Argentina. Right. How was the judging, the refereeing, the conditions, the opponents? How were things set up there? Sometimes you kind of wonder. Even the great Carlos Monzon in Argentina, he put something like 9 draws.
Right. Back then, they had a scoring system that if the fight was close, they called it a draw. It was in Argentina. I forget what the name was. But that's why Monzon's record is littered with a lot of draws, and he beat all of those guys in rematches.
And if I had to give a pick who would win between both of them, it would be unfair to ask me to pick. But if I absolutely had to,
I'm going to go with Lausi.
I would go with Hurricane Carter, because Hurricane Carter, even though he was a murderous puncher, he showed the ability to fight hard over the distance and win rounds. Listen, his fight at the Garden against, like he fought, Georgie Benton there at the Garden was a really
decision to him.
Roaring fight. Yeah, and he's been in with good company.
I don't think that fight goes the distance, Jack. I favor Lausi. He had one of the best left hooks in the history of the middleweight division. I would favor him. It would be an unbelievable fight.
Get a title shot.
Jack, that's a good question. I don't know if he got beat on the way or if he did fight for the title. That's something I'd have to look up. There's a guy who I know of who I haven't really done enough research on. I don't know why he didn't get a title shot. What do you got there, Lee? It was also in Brazil. In Brazil, a fighter had to win by 4 points. Okay, so that same thing that existed in Argentina was the same thing, and then they called it a draw. Thank you for clarifying that. I didn't know that was in Brazil too. I picked Calzaghe, and our buddy Jason Gonzalez, I saw it pop up, Jack. He said he likes Tony to stop Calzaghe. I don't see that at all. Could he win a decision? I can't see him stopping Calzaghe.
The closest thing you could say to Joe Calzaghe, who James Toney fought when he was really good, was maybe Michael Nunn. Nunn didn't have the work rate, but the same style, long, lanky box from the outside.
And Nunn was winning that fight going away until he got caught.
Right. So I wouldn't count James Toney out of any fight.
No. He's too good. I just think that he wasn't consistent enough at the weight between 60 and 68. And that's kind of the same reason why I would favor Lausi over Carter, Jack, because Carter had a little Benny Briscoe in him where he was a little up and down himself.
Okay, Frank. Had a good stuff, Frank. Well, we had a lot of fun this week. The hour went by really quick, and next week we'll have a lot to talk about.
We'll have a ton to talk about, Jack. That's for sure. Thanks, everybody, for your suggestions. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.